So I'm here today with Morgan Godvin to talk about the difference between men's and women's prisons. So first of all, why'd you go to prison? What's your history? What's going on?
I was arrested for drug-induced homicide, so for the overdose death of my best friend. And then I was pled down to conspiracy to distribute heroin. And this was a federal charge, and they gave me 60 months on that.
So you spent 60 months in federal prison basically for sharing drugs with a friend?
Yeah. I mean, 4.5 years in federal custody. I spent 2 years in jail, 2 years in prison.
Okay. And if you don't know, I spent 19 years in a Virginia men's prison for robbery and unlawful wounding. So very different crimes, but we both ended up in the same place. And we've had some weird stories about like the difference of like security level and safety and like how violence can actually be your friend and like just weirdness.
Yeah, I mean, the differences are crazy. Some of the similarities are also amusing, but because, I was in a federal prison in the Bay Area of California with women from all over the country, actually all over the world. And then you were in...
So I was in Virginia. I was in 4 different prisons in Virginia, but all kind of the central region. And the furthest thing we had people from Southwest Virginia, which is a very tip, that were like 4 or 6 hours from home. But you had people that were literally from, even if they were like U.S. citizens, were from Hawaii. Or
Hawaii and Alaska. Hawaii, Alaska, Montana, because Native Americans off of reservations would be sent there, so North and South Dakota, and so we didn't really get visits. Like my family, the nearest federal prison to Portland, Oregon, where my crime was out of, was in the Bay Area of California, so it was like a 10-hour drive, so I couldn't get visits.
Yeah. So did you get a visit your entire time?
I got 4 visits my entire time from 4 different people, so 4 different people visited me once.
And because I look back, getting visits was one of the things that fundamentally kept me on track and put me on track. It was that twice a month I knew I was going to be able to see my mom and my grandfather. And then other friends would come different times, but that was a consistent part of my schedule. That was what recharged me and gave me hope and kept me going. So you had to do it all yourself.
Yeah. But I wasn't alone because it was a federal prison, a lot of us weren't getting visits. Okay. Just under half the prison were actually Mexican citizens that lived in Mexico, so their family absolutely could not visit them. And so, I didn't feel as alone because there was only a few people from the local area that were there that got visits regularly. And the rest of us were sort of in my situation. So, yeah, it sucked. It was brutal, but at least it sucked in sort of the same way as the people around me.
Well, because people ask me all the time if I miss anything from prison. And the thing that I say is, I miss the camaraderie and I miss the time. It sounds like you had that. You're in there with a group of people you probably never would have seen or talked to or interacted with in the outside world. And yet there's this bond because you're having this common experience in this common place.
I will say I think the camaraderie is a little diminished in the women's facility.
Really?
Yeah. What the male guards, why do they hate to work the women's? Do you know? You told me a story that's a different reason.
Yeah.
Because we're big drama.
Okay.
Because it's a lot of petty fighting, and because there isn't that accountability mechanism of violence, or it's different. We'll talk about it later, but it's different. People get away with acting real messy, and so you have to make a smaller circle. There's no hierarchy or political structure to us, our social context. And so you really just have to sort of zoom in and narrow your social circle. And because we're coming from different countries, different cultures, different states, it wasn't quite as easy to have that unifying bond.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that because there was I've made a conscious choice of having a small circle. But those were the people that I really trusted. That was Graham that I went to pick up. That's my buddy Dan. Those are the people that I'm going to have in my life for the rest of my life, whether they get out or not. But then there was a general group. When a guard came in and acting a fool, everybody came together, bro, you're not doing this. There was a sense of unity, and it wasn't super strong, and people broke code, and people snitched, and people did all that kind of stuff. But there was still that. And I remember those were the days, it was Christmas or holidays, or we had a picnic day every year. That was everybody was chill. Whatever gang politics was going on, all that stuff's on hold. Whatever personal beefs are going on, all that's on hold because we're going to have a picnic, which isn't a picnic. You're not literally sitting around at the table, but you get a tray of food, you get to go on the yard. Sometimes it would let the bands come out there and play. You play all the tournament soccer games, basketball games, and it was a festive day, and everybody was in that mood. And at Christmas, it was kind of a mix because it was festive, but it was also people severely depressed and missing family and coming together in that common suck.
Yeah. We had that to some degree, the softball days. But I just still feel people grouped up and sort of stayed with their groups more, and not in a racial segregation way per se, just in like a common culture way, because we were from so many different parts, and so people didn't always. It was a very successful divide and conquer, really, because we were just so busy fighting amongst ourselves or bickering, or just. Mostly it was just trying to get basic resources for you and your group. Specifically, like Christmas and Thanksgiving, there's never enough tables and chairs. Like, so the prison's terribly overcrowded, and there's 1,200 people in a unit, but there's only like 15 tables, and so it did not go well. So Christmas and Thanksgiving specifically, because people are trying to cook spreads and do the whole thing, and they need a lot of space, and so it was like
constant.
It was just. Yeah, and so you can't be like, oh, there's enough for everyone, like abundance mentality, because there's not. So either you get a chair for you and your friends, or you're going to stand and not be able to cook. There's not enough for everybody to go around, and so it really promotes this sort of psychological, like, well, then I'm going to get mine.
Yeah. Well, so that was one of the things I think about with phones. So at the higher level prison, we had a warden come in who a lot of people didn't like, but his thing was, I'm going to give you everything you're supposed to have, and I'm going to be super strict. But what that meant was we had 6 phones, because he put in extra phones, for 64 people. So that was basically a phone for every 10 people. It was like, bad.
We have 4 phones for 1,200.
Yeah, and then when I went to the lower level, we had 4 phones for 82, and I saw more fights and more arguments and more issues behind that, because they just didn't want to do it. They were like, oh, well, this isn't a priority. We don't care if people have contact with their families.
Yeah.
And it was, you provide scarcity and you create drama and you create conflict.
Absolutely.
And then you get to say, oh, look at these animals. Look at how bad they act. Well, you're not allowing people to do that. When you talk about resources, I think about we would struggle sometimes to get toilet paper.
Yeah, us too.
And you had, besides toilet paper,
pads and tampons.
Exactly.
It was a mess. Just on this scarcity, it's like when I first got there in the feds, I don't know what they do in the States, but in the feds they give you the khaki uniform and then these construction reinforced toe boots. No regular shoes. Okay, so we're walking around in these boots that don't fit us right. Yeah. And my first week, they don't give you pajamas or anything to change. It's just these khakis. And then, this woman ran a Christian ministry and she would get us the shampoo. They didn't give us hygiene kits, man. We got nothing. We got dumped in there with nothing. And the woman who ran the Christian ministry would make sure that we had hair ties and shampoo and conditioner and soap. She ended up getting clemency. She had life and she got out. Yeah, and that was no one deserved it more in the world probably. But those boots, man, because shoes, it's that's a scarce resource. And because if a pair of shoes costs $65, most people have to work 2 or 3 months to get a pair of shoes. And so I'm wearing these boots and my feet start bleeding. I got blisters so bad that my feet are bleeding. And I'm walking past the laundry room because there was washers and dryers and you'd have to sign up for a slot. And I see a pair of shoes sitting on top of the washers and dryers. And nobody's around. There's no cameras there. My feet are bleeding. And I see somebody else's tennis shoes. And it was the closest in my life I ever came to stealing something.
Yeah.
Every impulse in my body said, take those shoes. Because I had just such bitter need for shoes in that moment. And I was able to resist because, hell, I had $1,000 on my books. I just had to wait for the next commissary shop and put in the order, and it takes 4 weeks to get tennis shoes. But yeah, and then even just tampons and pads, toilet paper, them running out of stuff all the time, which causes people to hoard stuff because you never know when it's coming again. So then you got the federal prison I was at, they ran out of pads, which they gave us for free. And then they ran out of tampons, which they sold us on commissary for $7 a box at the same time. I said, well, what are we supposed to do? And he said, plug up with toilet paper.
That's insane.
And then, people fight about it. Of course, people fight about it. Because some people have a bunch that they've hoarded, and some people have absolutely none. And that inequality
creates a problem.
Yeah.
So I never thought about this. With all those women in the same area, the whole myth of women starting to menstruate on the same cycle, does that happen in prison?
I mean, that's not a myth.
Okay.
That, while scientifically we don't understand why that happens, it does happen, but not a prison-wide. Usually that will happen in a cell.
Okay.
People in the cell with you.
Okay.
Will sync up, but not always.
Okay.
It's
I was just imagining the entire prison going on their period and no pads to be had and just violence and blood and insanity.
No, everybody, usually started at different times, but they were real scarce with birth control because it's technically prohibited to give inmates birth control because inmates aren't supposed to be having sex. But people take birth control for other reasons. I'm now on the next one on because of this, and they just were stingy with it, and so people had endometriosis and a lot of OBGYN
Horrible,
issues, and there just wasn't really care.
That's horrible. Well, let's start at the beginning. So what did your receiving or reception process look like?
Okay, so I'm in a jail in Portland, Oregon, and I'd been sentenced, so I knew they were coming for me, the U.S. Marshals. And then they came for me, they transported me to the Portland airport, and I flew Con Air with armed 50 cals on the tarmac. And they take you to a private prison in Pahrump, Nevada. And so I was at a core civic facility in Pahrump. And then from there, they flew us to Dublin. And we're from all over the country, right? So Pahrump is the west of the Mississippi receiving center, and we're from all over. And then they're processing us. Dublin had a camp, so a minimum, and the FCI, Federal Correctional Institute, which is a medium. And I thought I was going to the camp. I really did. And then, they did the little sorting hatch thing, and I got put in the real prison inside. Yeah. And I just remember sobbing. And by this point, we'd all been awake for about 28 hours. So we're sleep deprived. My photo on my ID, I look like I'm high because we're all so sleep deprived. And it's just a blur, really. I just remember being super confused, strip search, getting the khakis, the ill-fitting boots, and nothing else though. I think they gave us one of those half-size toothbrushes and a thing of toothpaste and have at it. And then just dumping us into a A&D, I don't even know what that stands for, cell, which were these particularly overcrowded receiving cells in the center of the unit, and telling me that I had to report for duty the next day at 5:30 a.m. It was so confusing. What I remember from my first weeks, even when I go through my writing, it's confusion. Yeah. Perpetual confusion.
So we went. I was the only person taken from my jail that day. I went into transport. The jail actually does the transport, which surprised me because I thought DOC would do it. Yeah. Put me in the back of the car. It was the first time I'd been out on the road in 9 months or 10 months, and I'm enjoying this. It's beautiful. And they'd actually put me back in my street clothes because up to that point I'd only been wearing jail scrubs. They put me in my street clothes, and I'm man, I got real clothes on. Yeah. I'm comfortable, and I'm riding down the road, and I get to the prison, and I remember I had all my stuff from the jail, my commissary, soups and deodorant and whatever. And as soon as I go to walk in, the guard's look, bro, take that stuff inside. They're gonna throw it away. You leave it here, I'll at least give it to somebody or give it to my kids. I was okay, cool. So I left it. So everything, no hygiene, no anything. I can't come in with anything. Yeah. I go in, they process me. They want to shave my head. They want to shave me down, except that they were you can have a mustache, but you can't have anything else. I'm dude, I'm not wearing a mustache. That feels ridiculous. Yeah. So they just shave everything. And they give me the same thing. Well, they give me a jumpsuit or 3 jumpsuits. No, back then it was only 2. You got 2 jumpsuits and you got 3 pairs of whites, and then you could exchange your whites. I think once a week, which was insane because you obviously have to wash all your stuff in the shower. Yeah, you don't have enough clothes. And same thing, they gave us a small toothbrush, a small thing of toothpaste, and a little teeny bar of soap. And we're you'll get your soap when they pass it out this week. So I go in there. I've got nothing. I've got no food. I got no deodorant. Yeah. I got this little thing that's not going to last a week. I got soap that isn't going to last a week. And they go and they lock me in a cell. And this is the old school penitentiary. This is 3 floors of open cells, bars. Yeah. Dudes we're getting thrown off the tier. It was crazy. And I get there, and the cross section is what I remember. Because we literally had a dude who had beaten his girlfriend to death with a baseball bat, who was getting ready to go to Red Onion with a life sentence and 50 years. And then we had some kid who got caught with weed and was in there for 6 months, but had somehow made it to receive. And we're why are these guys in the same, this is insane. Because in receiving, you don't have a classification yet, so that you're just going somewhere. And we sat in there, and it was, like you said, it was confusion, but I got to go outside for the first time in 10 months. And I was I go outside, and they have a little, weight machine, and they have a handball court that was, actually just the side of a building, and it was cracked. But it was, the most amazing feeling to be outside. And I got super sunburned in just an hour because I hadn't seen the sun. But yeah, I remember that was the thing. It was being able to go outside that just absolutely made my day.
Absolutely. I went almost 2 years without seeing the sun or moon. And there was like technically an outdoor rec yard, but it was this like little tiny concrete box with like 40-foot walls. So the sun couldn't shine. Like occasionally you could get raindrops, and that was like the closest to nature you were going to get. But it was actually when they flew me to Pahrump, because, you know, it's just like holding cell, and the United States Marshals stopped the airplane everywhere to pick up mostly undocumented immigrants who were about to get deported from Pahrump. That's mostly what we were flying around the country doing. But then, you know, they land, and we like touch down in the Las Vegas airport. And I used to go to Las Vegas with my mom on work conferences, so we're like pulling in by the Luxor. And I'm like, I'm like shackled. They didn't black box me, and I've got ankle shackles. And like, you know, I had to pee on the airplane.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine being a woman. At least men can just sort of like,
yeah.
But no, you need to pull your pants down. How do you do that when you're shackled? Anyway, okay. So we get it, but the prison is like a long drive from the airport. It's like 2 hours. So they load us in this bus, and we're driving like past on Sunset. February, there's still snow on the ground, and there's just these like stark mountains, and I'm seeing the most beautiful sunset of my life. Still seeing snow in the desert, and then I get to Pahrump, and they have like a proper rec yard, and I got sunburned almost immediately. And I just remember looking out and thinking, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I'm in some private prison facility in like the middle of nowhere, Nevada. And it was beautiful, and the food was edible, much better than it had been in the county jail where I was. But then, getting to prison and being able to go outside, seeing the moon regularly.
We didn't get to see the moon.
You didn't.
Oh my! So I didn't get to see the moon or the stars. Like you could sometimes see it out your window depending on what cell you were in, but we weren't allowed outside after. It was supposed to be 6 p.m., but if it was programs after 8 p.m., so you couldn't go outside. So for me, it was 13 years until I got to the honor pod. I was at Buckingham for 12 years. So no, I guess it's 16 or 17 years in. I was at the honor pod for 12 years, and I got to go out on the patio. There was like a little patio attached, and every morning I got up and watched the sunrise, and every night I went out and looked at the stars.
Yes. The
only time I got to see the stars or the moon before that, they called us. I was on a maintenance crew, and they needed to replace the concrete in front of one of the buildings. And so they called us. We started work at 6 p.m. and we worked with fucking sledgehammers until 6 a.m. breaking the concrete and then building the forms for the node because they had a concrete saw but they didn't have gas. So literally we're out there on like a chain gang for a 12-hour shift overnight. But every time somebody stopped, I would just like look up and like if you could like block out the big lights, like, you could see the stars.
I couldn't see the stars because it's like the Bay Area, so there's already light pollution, and then they have the stadium lights, so I could never see. But you know, we could see them because you go more north, you're there in Northern California, and the sun sets really early in the winter, like 5:30, and you know we didn't have to be in till 8:30. So winter, fall, even part of the spring, I could just.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and so like one of my thing was to always go out and watch the sunset at Rec, because there was like really beautiful sunsets, and I would like listen to my meditation song. I would watch the sunset, and I would meditate every night at Rec when it wasn't raining.
That's awesome. All right, so how long were you at your receiving prison before going to the main place?
That is, so that's not how it works in the feds.
Really?
The Pahrump was the receiving facility.
Okay, so
and then from there, they send you to whichever federal facility you're going to be at. So by the time I got to Dublin, Dublin is your home base. Now there's two parts of Dublin, and it's always a question: are you going to go to the camp, or are you going to go to the medium? But so there's not like a receiving prison in the federal system because they're so spread out.
Yeah, you can't do it.
You can't do it, and you know they're coast to coast. And so you know, as soon as I got on the plane from Pahrump, and they was going to California, I knew I was going to FCI Dublin. There's not that many options. There's very few women's federal prisons, and so I knew where I was going.
Okay, yeah, because I was at Powhatan receiving for 3 months. Then they packed me up, I remember, January 3rd, because it was the same. I got transferred somehow from there to Nottoway, and then from Nottoway to Buckingham on the same date, like exactly 4 years apart. But so they put us on the bus, and I didn't know where I was going. They had classified me as level 4 out of 6 back then. So 6 was the full-time 24-hour lockdown seg prison where they they literally had lawsuits over people getting killed by guards. It was like a bad situation. And then you had the level 5s, which were like the highest security, but that was where you had all the like gang leaders, all the really bad problems. You didn't want to go there. Then you did the level 4s. And I was like, well, this is not seeming much better. Like, I don't know what I'm getting into. Yeah. And so they sent me to Nottoway. And like on the bus, you're hearing all these stories like, yeah, dude ain't going to make it. Like they hit him in the neck. And I'm like, oh my God, like this, what am I getting into? But what surprised me the most was we walked through, we had to get all our cards. I remember the guard at property gave me a pack of cigarettes. So, because we could smoke back
Different
then.
times.
And they had told me that you couldn't take an open thing of tobacco because they were worried about contraband. So I had taken my tobacco and I had like rolled a bunch of cigarettes and like tried to stuff it and shit. Yeah. And he's going through my stuff. He's like, bro, like, why do you got roll-ups in your pants? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, I was like, well, they told me we couldn't have it. He's like, they told you that for real? He's like, well, look, I just took these from dude. Like, here you go. I think they had like one cigarette missing. Yeah. It's like, dude, just give me a pack of Marlboros. Like, what the? So we go in there and we walk through a pod that was locked down, and it's just like they all had like jail cells or like the whole cells. So you have like slots and metal over the doors. You like can't really see out, and you can lock all the slots and set up for segregation because the whole camp used to like have a lockdown facility. So then I walk into the pod that I'm going into, and it's just people chilling, like on the phone, like playing cards, watching TV, writing. And I was like, wait a minute, I thought like people were getting murdered and things. Yeah. But so it seems really normal, and for a couple days it seems really normal. Like people are cordial, people get along, and then it was I think 3 days in, what they would do for breakfast is they would announce breakfast call. You had to stick your hand out their slot. They would open your door. You step out in the pod, and then they lock you in the pod, and then you're in the pod for 5 minutes or for an hour while they wait to call your pod to breakfast. So we're out there, and everybody's like tired and not really going. But I get out, and it's dead silent. And like you're like, man, what's going on? And these two guys start like talking, and they start arguing. Then one step back and pulls this like big ass Rambo knife out of his pants. The other one steps and pulls like locks and socks out of his pants. And I was like, bro, it's like 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Like, what are y'all doing?
Yeah.
And that was when I realized, like, yeah, it's calm most of the time, but like when it happens, it's not a pretty thing.
I mean, yeah, that's prison. It doesn't actually make good TV because like 95% of the time it's just really boring. But then that other 5% of the time is absolute chaos. And I think at the women's prison, the chaos was mostly generated by the guards.
Okay.
Yeah, they were the shit starters generally. Which is unfortunate. That's because there's no accountability in the women's system. They were never going to get hurt by the women. They were never in danger. And so they would just treat us really badly. Like so many of them were just heinous people who would just like thrive on generating chaos. And I'm like, wow, I thought your job was to provide law and order. Like, I'll never forget this one. My first weekend when they still had movies. So they would pull out the projector screen in the gym and like set chairs up and they would project us like new-ish movies, like 2 years old or something. It was cool. A whole bunch of people had lined up in front of the gym, single file, real organized, waiting for them to unlock it because there's never enough chairs. So you want to be in line so you can get somewhere to sit. And so there's maybe 150 of us in line at the gym, waiting in the front door. So what do? Can you guess? They open the side door to watch us run and fight to try to get a chair. And the guard's laughing. You can tell he's just done this on purpose. There had been a nice, orderly, single-file line. He's like, oh yeah, it'd be funny if I opened the side door. And it's just like little stuff like that, where the guards would just like find ways to mess with people. And then like if people didn't get into a fight, clearly it's their fault. And now they're going to the shoe. It's like, okay.
When people ask me about the prison guards all the time, and I got really lucky at a couple of places I was at. Like Nottoway wasn't cool, like it wasn't the same level, but it wasn't really bad. Like you had more abusive guards or more like really kind of malicious guards, but it was still like 5 or 10%. When I got to Buckingham, it was the best culture I ever saw. Like you had a couple like real a-hole guards. Mm-hmm. One of them, I remember we had this lieutenant who, God, he was terrible. Like we were having a college class. There was a community college that would come in and teach classes, and I got some of my classes through them as well as through Ohio. So we're in class, and he comes in, interrupts the professor, makes everybody go outside and strip searches us one by one for no reason. Like literally no intel, no anything going on. Then he threatens us, and then sends us back to class. And this was his MO. He just used to run around terrorizing people. He was such an exception though, he wasn't like that. And not long after, he was arrested and given like 13 years in prison for molesting his granddaughter for a series of years. So it was like, oh, that's the kind of person.
Yeah.
But for the most part, there was a good culture of like at least respecting people or leaving them alone or not doing whatever. And I told you the other day, we had this one guard who came from another institution who was like gung-ho, like starting problems, threatening people. Like it's one thing, like if you go in and do your job or you shake me down and catch me with something, like you didn't do anything wrong. when you're instigating and you're threatening and you're like putting your hands on people, the other guards pulled him aside and were like, yo, bro, you're trying to get us hurt. Like, this is not okay. He kept doing what he was doing, and they beat his ass. Like, they caught him in the parking lot and whooped his ass, and he ended up going somewhere else. So it's like there was this self-governing mechanism that sounds like you didn't have at all.
We had absolutely none of that. Because how would we? First off, we're not unified. How can you even have that much gang culture when you're from like 18 different states or in different countries? Like, and just like women are just like generally like less political, less violent. But it meant we didn't develop that self-governance at all. So there's no hierarchy, there's no accountability network, and that made the behavior amongst ourselves be permissive of really bad shit, including snitching. Like, snitches would just get like it's just cool. It's just, it's what we do here. And then also, and the more toxic element of that is it meant the guards just got away with everything, anything and everything, because there's no governance. And clearly the administration wasn't going to stop them. The administration doesn't actually care if they are just, seeding chaos constantly and instigating. Like that one guy, he would search cells and like grab your shampoo and squeeze it out on your floor. And that was just okay. You could just do that. Like shaking down somebody's cell because they talked during count, and then like creating a wild mess of baby powder and shampoo on the floor that they then have to clean up. That's like sadistic.
And see, that again, that's so different because like you had the old school guards that remember when guards were getting stabbed all the time, who would like literally take their shoes off before they went into somebody's cell to shake down because they knew dude waxed his floor. Then they like changed the culture. They started doing whatever, but like that's how it was. They'd be like, look, I show them respect because I know they let me go home every night. And it was like that was what I walked into when I first got locked up, and then it slowly became more and more crazy. And then when they sent me to the dormitory to the lower level, it was exactly like what you're talking about. It was just no respect, no consideration, all BS. Everybody trying to make a name for themselves because they got like 6 months or 2 years. There's no consequence. Like it was by far the worst place I've ever been. 10 months there during COVID, I would have rather done 5 years somewhere else. I mean, it was horrible.
Yeah. Okay, you just mentioned the thing about the floors. Can we talk about floors in prison for a minute? Because, listen, I never could fully understand it. What is the deal with floors? Floors are meant to be walked on. That's why they exist.
No, I like you get these guys that are
you one of the guys?
No, I cleaned the cell, like especially when I finally got to clean like a single cell. But I didn't put wax down, like I didn't care. Okay. I walked on the floor, I did it. But yeah, I had cellies who like you got to take your shoes off. You don't like you got to wipe the floor down 3 times a day, or not like you have to, but somebody has to when you divide up duties. Like, and I'm like, bro, like we're living in here. Like, what's the story? But I get it. It's about like beautifying your environment or like feeling clean or feeling organized. It's so my buddy, actually the guy who's on the board of the nonprofit. I went to his house and I opened his fridge, and it was a prison locker. It was just rows of things neatly organized, and I was like, bro, like you're not in anymore. Like you can put it down. But you can always. And I remember a guard commented on one of my TikTok videos. He was like, I bet if I opened your closet, you'd have rows of shampoo and soap and whatever. And I went and looked, and sure enough, I have like my rows of stuff. Because that's what you do. You never know when you're going to run out, so you got to have 10 deodorants and 10 soaps. You have a riot, you're not getting commissary, like something happens. So I had that, and it was always looking that way, and I got out and still had that habit. Luckily now I'm getting like a little more like loose and messy.
Yeah, we didn't have that. Our commissary almost never got interrupted.
Really?
Yeah, never, because we didn't have riots. People didn't kill people.
We didn't have so many riots, but it was like we would have a big lockdown because of a gang fight, or we would have this, or it'd be like a month we didn't have something, or...
The whole time I was there, the most we got put on lockdown for a few days because there was a political protest.
Okay.
And that was it. Now, clearly, I got out before COVID because they were about to get locked down for months and months and months in tiny little cells that don't even meet the Bureau of Prisons minimum standard for square space per person. But yeah, I never got the floor thing. I was so disorganized, though. I still am. I would pay my friends to help me like organize my locker because it was just like we had this much space
for everything
for our entire lives.
Yeah. Food,
clothes. Your clothes or your snacks are in there next to your deodorant. You have one locker. It was so crazy. I was so bad. I can't do it.
Sounds about right. So, what about drugs in the women's prison?
All right. So, for the same reasons that we don't have accountability and self-governance, we don't really have drugs. Okay, because there's no real mechanism for us to collect debts from each other.
Okay.
How are you going to get paid? How are you going to ensure that someone's going to get paid? Women also mostly depend on men to take care of them on the outside, okay? Because they have boyfriends, husbands. Men are terrible caretakers, just in general. And so, like, it was harder for them to, like, get drugs in. Some people were able to work the guards, but I really rarely saw drugs. There was some Suboxone sometimes, a meth, but nothing like daily. Nothing was commonplace because we had no political hierarchy, no gang ties, no organization. And yeah, so that's interesting. And, you know, we had a lot of sex scandals where, like, you know, guards were in relationships or were sexually assaulting the women. And I have to think that some component of that probably did produce drugs in the facility. But it was so uncommon that, like, if it was there, it was so under wraps that I didn't even see it. I didn't even know. I saw someone go to the SHU for drugs one time. One time.
I mean, drugs were ubiquitous in men's prisons.
That's
like,
crazy.
What do you want? You want some meth today? You want some coke? You want some this? Like, actually, coke was a little more rare. Like, you couldn't necessarily get that every day.
Yeah.
But weed, meth, you know, heroin, yeah, it's just there.
It was like that in Multnomah County Jail.
Okay.
Yeah, in the county jail specifically, because women have an easier time concealing drugs than men do. We have a more conducive orifice. Seriously.
I don't know. I've seen dudes bring back like 6 ounces, so.
But they can't get it up there as fast
Sure.
as we can. And so, especially when people are getting arrested off the street,
Just, yeah.
like you know, getting pulled over, like, women have an easier time, especially if, like, a male-female pair is getting pulled over. The dude's gonna hand it to the guy if the cop's already behind him.
Yeah.
And so the women's dorm was just inundated with drugs. But it wasn't the mechanisms that get it in prison. It was people coming off the street. About 90% of it was off the street, then some, like, work crew drops and pickups and stuff. But yeah, we just didn't have the organization for it in prison.
Well, and one of the things, so I remember there's a psychologist that I used to go talk to who worked at the women's prison before, and I was like, well, you know, why don't the women have drugs? She said, because they have sex. Like, their drama and their addiction is just sex. Like, 90% of what I did was deal with interpersonal drama surrounding sex.
So I wouldn't even say sex, but definitely homosexual relationships were ubiquitous, openly and socially appropriate, like the norm. It was odd if you were the rigid heterosexual who didn't get in relationships. You know, gay for the stay, is what we'd always say. But not all these couples were having sex. It was more about intimacy and connection. But that didn't mean that it caused drama, for sure. And unfortunately, you have to think about who's in prison and the trauma history.
Yeah.
And, you know, just like who we're putting in prison is not the most well-adjusted people of society. And so I would say about 80% of women in prison got in a relationship. Now, I don't know what percentage of theirs was actual, like, having sex. A little more than half, maybe 2/3.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Or if they did have sex, it was, like, super infrequent and forced. Because, like, it's not that 80% of the population is gay. That's just not true. We have data on this. 80% of the population is not gay. So how are 80% of women in homosexual relationships in prison? Well, they're not, like, gay.
Sure.
It's an environmental thing. And women's sexuality is more fluid than men's. We know this. But of the relationships, a huge proportion of them were violent. And it's the number one cause of violence by a huge margin, was romantic relationships. And so whether that's jealousy or, oh, you had sex with my girl or whatever, that is 95% of the fights. And even when it wasn't fights that you were seeing, a huge proportion of these relationships, you just saw girls come out with black eyes, you know, they're missing a tooth, they have bruises, and you could tell that their relationship is just abusive. And, you know, when I first got there, I was naive. Like, you know, I have 2 moms. I'm a sperm donor baby. I was raised in a lesbian household that actually did have domestic violence. It's more common than people think in lesbian relationships. But, you know, I'm like super anti-violence. And so the first time I saw a girl beating up her girlfriend, I tried to intervene. Don't do that. Don't do it. I know, I'm serious. It's prison. You can't get yourself involved in everybody's drama, especially when it's manifesting as violence, because you're going to play yourself into that. Yeah. And so I had to, like, condition myself
to ignore witnessing victimization, which goes against like every part of my moral fiber. But there was really no alternative. You know, the abuser would go to the shoe, get out, and they would just get right back together. And there's just so much toxicity and so much trauma. 9 out of 10 women were survivors of sexual assault, often repeatedly throughout their life course. So much trauma. And that unhealed trauma often manifested as intimate partner violence.
That's terrible. See, in the men's prison, it was common, not nearly as common, but it was not accepted either. I mean, it was accepted to some degree by the culture. Like when I first went in, the whole thing was like, if you're the man in the relationship, you're not gay, which I always like thought was insane and laughable. But the staff, like if they caught people like holding hands in the bed together, anything, like not even sex, just like any intimate action, you're going to the hole. Like that is a charge. You're going to the hole, and then you are not ever going to be on the same side of the yard again. Like they're going to split you up, and you cannot even. So you would see people literally at the one place had 2 fences that were separated, like at the fence, like reaching their fingers through, like, honey, I love. Yeah. And it was heartbreaking because it was like, all right, if this is an abusive relationship, and there was a fair amount of that. I mean, I remember this poor kid Jazz. He got into a relationship with an older guy, kind of like for protection, and he used to beat the shit out of him. Yeah. But here's what's crazy: Jazz was in there for cutting a dude's dick off and murdering him, and I was like, bro, you're gonna get like. I'm not saying that violence is ever justified, but like if you're beating up on your boyfriend and he cuts your dick off, like you kind of invited that. It never happened to the best of my knowledge, but yeah. I mean, it just that stuff blew my mind.
So I just gotten off the receiving. I'm still in an A&O cell, like a receiving cell. I will never forget this. And this is like culture clash of different generations of guards, like you already talked about. They cleared for 4 o'clock count and say, count time, count time, count time. Get out from under your girlfriend, go to your own room, count time. And I'm like, what? Like over the PA. And then I would see, and there's cameras. And I don't know if they work, but there's cameras. And you just see people making out. And I'm like, what? I thought like, I knew this happens, but I thought it was like hidden. But part of that like sowing chaos and disorder culture that came from that federal prison was the rules were not always enforced. Yeah. And so same-sex relationships were widely permitted by the COs, but then you'd get some or you get one in a bad mood. Yeah. Or who had got rejected by some chick he was trying to flirt with. And you're like, and now they're coming down full PREA on you.
So for those of you who don't know, PREA is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. It's a federal standard that was supposed to reduce unwanted sex and sexual advances in prison, both between prisoners as well as guards, and ultimately it does absolutely nothing.
It just like gives them new tools to criminalize consensual sex, but it doesn't actually reduce the incidence of sexual assault. Like at FCI Dublin, where I was, in the past 18 months, 5 staff members have gotten arrested for sexual assault, including the warden and the chaplain. So I could never take a college class. There was 0 college credits offered to me, but there was unlimited Bible study from a chaplain who was sexually assaulting women. And
we had, so rape, like actual like traditional rape, was fairly rare in Virginia prisons. Like it happened, but on occasion. Now, intimate partner rape was pretty common. Like there was a lot of really ugliness around that. But I just remember that the PREA thing became, it was pound 55 was the thing. You would hit pound 55 on the phone, and you could anonymously report, and all it became was a snitch line. It was like another way to tell on people. But it also, in a weird way, became a tool against the guards. Because the whole thing is you could report assault by the guards, and they weren't supposed to be able to know about it. And they actually did, and that created all kinds of problems. Yeah. But if a guy had a problem with a guard, and like he couldn't, like back in the day, like they'd shoot a one with you. There was this whole crew at Nottoway that would like go in the cell with you. They would fight you, win or lose, and then get out. It's not like that anymore. Now it's like you have words, they bring the goon squad, they beat the crap out of you, and you go to the hole. But so what they would do, and I had a buddy who got away with this. So he kept getting into it with the lieutenant. They kept going back and forth. They go back and forth. So finally, the lieutenant like bumped into him one day and like touched him. And he was like, bro. So he hit pound 55. He was like, dude sexually assaulted me. Like, I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. So the lieutenant finds out and is mad and goes and confronts him. And this guy intentionally like walks away, but in a way that makes the guy hand hit his ass. He then turns around, beats the brakes off this lieutenant, like hospitalizes him, and does not get charged because he had previously reported a sexual assault. and then is on camera having his ass touched by the lieutenant, and it's a justified self-defense because he was being sexually assaulted. So in the weirdest way, it actually kind of like leveled the playing field by giving prisoners tools against the guards, but it's just not a good system.
We didn't have that at all. And I will say that traditional rape from the guards with women was exceedingly rare.
Okay.
But they would get in inappropriate sexual relationships. But one of the most disturbing things I ever saw was a lesbian guard who started stalking a friend of mine. And because she was my friend and she would see me with her, she got this like crazy weird jealousy, and then I started getting real scared that she was gonna plant something in my and yeah, it's crazy. But like inappropriate sexual relationships. Well, we definitely did have one guard who, I thought he was cool. I thought he was just like engaged and interested. He was a Marine Corps veteran, and we would like talk about the military or whatever. But come to find out, he's like looking in your personal file and listening to your phone calls to get sensitive information to manipulate you into having like a relationship with him. I'm pretty sure the dude had PTSD really bad and hurt people. Okay, this is just another way we're seeing trauma manifest as really inappropriate stuff. But yeah, he's probably going to prison. So it's just.
Well, because you haven't talked about it. You're a veteran, aren't you?
Technically, I joined the Air Force when I was 19 years old. My mom was career military. She retired from the Air Force. I grew up a military brat. I had strayed a little bit. I could see that my future wasn't looking bright if I stayed on that path. And so I said, I'm going to join the military. But I got hurt. I got hurt in basic training. Prescribed a bunch of Percocet for 30 days. Now, that wasn't my first time using drugs, but they gave me high dose oxycodone for 30 days straight. And then we're like, oh, all these dreams that you've had about joining the military and, having a life worth living and having a purpose. Yeah, we're going to snatch this out from under you. And we're giving you an entry-level separation, and here's your plane ticket home back to Portland. And I had to walk back into Pizza Hut and ask for my job back. And I was devastated, and I ended up addicted to heroin within a couple months. Escalated to injection drug use a few months after that.
Yeah, and your decline did directly lead to you going to prison. There was a longer use period. But it was, that was my experience. It was 3 months from when I started using cocaine to when I went to prison. And in that 3 months, I went from the kid taking a year off from college, not doing great, drinking too much, making bad decisions, but pretty much okay, to completely out of my mind, has no septum left. I destroyed everything in that period of 3 months. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. Carrie, who wrote this book, which is absolutely amazing, talks about going from being a competitive figure skater, from best and brightest and everything, to just completely losing it, because as that dream is stripped away, whatever it is, and drugs are available, especially prescribed drugs that lead to illicit drugs, it's such a common pattern. And for me, I don't have that excuse. It wasn't, a doctor gave me drugs. It was, I was super lonely and insecure and not sure of myself. I did cocaine. I felt like Superman, and I was like, I want to feel like this forever. I always want to do this.
I was smoking crack before I even joined the Air Force. So it's not like a doctor gave me drugs. That was a nice narrative, and I certainly wrote that in my sentencing memo. Okay. Because, the nice, innocent white person that got prescribed drugs from their doctor gets a lot more sympathy, even though at its core, drug addiction all comes from the same place. It's that sense of, I don't belong, I'm lonely, I'm awkward, I have pain, I have emotional pain. And whether your first experience with drugs was from a doctor or from the street, and now 99% of the time it's from the street, you're just sort of self-medicating for that emotional pain. But yeah, cocaine's a hell of a drug. That's the closest I ever came to dying, was a cocaine overdose. And now that's probably not true, because I overdosed on heroin. When you overdose on heroin, you're just asleep. Yeah. You're just hypoxic, you're turning blue. But yeah, cocaine is caused such a rapid decline in my ability to function as a person.
You have the best metaphor. I always tell people, when you want cocaine, it's like you're drowning and you need air. And what you said, I think, is actually even better.
Yeah, so imagine you fasted for 36 hours. You haven't had anything to eat. You're starving. And someone sits you down at the dinner table and puts a plate of your favorite food under your face, and it's steaming, and you can smell it, and your mouth is watering, and you're so hungry. And they say, but now don't eat it. And you just have to stare at it. You know exactly what you want, and you know exactly how to fill your needs, and everything in your brain is screaming, eat it, eat it, eat it. And yet, for whatever reason, some other logical part is saying, well, don't eat it because it's bad. And then there's just this war, and we lose the war 9 times out of 10 because you're going to eat the food that's in front of your face. You're starving, and it's a biological impulse to satiate that hunger. And that is cocaine craving. And cocaine is like the biggest scam that exists.
Yeah.
You know what a fraud? Cocaine is the biggest fraud of this century because it's not even fun. And like, people be like, oh, like all drugs are the same. No, bullshit. No. Cocaine is uniquely insidious because it's not even fun, but what it does cause is those cravings. And those cravings that hijack your biological impulse like it's hunger. Like it's thirst and you found water in the desert, but then you try. There's no amount of self-control that you can have to resist that compulsion. And that's why cocaine is a hell of a drug.
I agree. Yeah. And it's so funny because like you were a heroin addict and we talked about it. The only time I used heroin, I didn't shoot heroin until I went to prison. First time I shot heroin was in the cell with this heroin addict. It was like, bro, I got something, like, you want to... So I'm like standing there and I remember he injected me and I just hit. Dude. And I was like, bro. But the thing was, I got the rush from the injection.
Yeah.
I didn't like heroin. Like, it wasn't like a drug I liked to do. It was a drug I did when I wanted to kill myself and I needed to like die in a different way. When I was so stressed or so scared or so depressed, I would do dope and like I would just melt. And then I would wake up the next day and I would be able to keep going. Mm-hmm. And so it became a thing that really could have dangerously become a self-medicating thing. But for whatever reason, my cycles were less severe in prison. Like I had these really steep like cycles of depression and mania out here in the world. But in prison, like I could usually pull myself out of it after a day or two. So it became something that I couldn't afford, but also I didn't really get hooked on. And I was so grateful for it.
A lot of people that end up, addicted to heroin, and I don't like the word addict. I know you're going to say I'm like an progressive Portlander for saying this, but it's just like the way that word was used against me. It just like today, like I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm a pizza delivery driver, and they're like, oh, where do you work? And I'm like, well, no, I worked at Domino's 2.5 years ago. It's like, wait, what? And so I just don't like that word sort of reduces me to a single facet of my identity because I'm so many things, and like my use was like very problematic. I was very much addicted, but it's so often, at least in my experience, like it's people who have suicidal ideation. It's like, because it quiets that. It's like the only thing that quiets that. Like no other psychiatric medication can stifle these voices in my head that are constantly telling me to kill myself. And I know that sounds, I'm not actually going to kill myself, but I have recurring suicidal ideation. And heroin is a cure for that. But then eventually, and not even that long after, it starts creating more problems than it's fixing. But in the beginning, it works. If drugs weren't super effective, people wouldn't use them. Yeah. And so some of the narrative around drugs is so silly because it's like, well, obviously they do work. Like, that's why millions of people use them. But then often when that use becomes problematic, you slide into addiction. Well, you put it on the scale, the cost benefits analysis, it's costing you way more than it's benefiting you. But by that point, it's ingrained, it's a habit, and it's really hard to break from.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, I think about that. Like the first couple times I did cocaine, I loved it.
Yeah.
Every time after that, I did it so I didn't feel horrible.
Exactly. And then you just fall into this cycle. How many times did I wake up and desperately not want to do heroin, but then I would get dope sick, and I had to go to work, I had to go to school. I was, functional. I was very functional, actually. And so I would have to use even when I didn't want to, because I have that physical dependency, and then it just like set me in this cycle. And then I felt, I called I'm a dirtbag junkie, I'm a worthless piece of trash. And it was just like all these messages in my head from society essentially started making me feel hopeless, especially after I got the felony for drug possession, because I lost my EMT license. I lost my financial aid for school, like in rapid succession. I lost my job because I went to jail too many times. I started living out of my car. What else did I have to live for? Because like getting clean, finding recovery, that's the hard part. Honestly, like it's easier just to get another bag and use another day and use another day. It takes much more effort, mentally and physically, to find recovery. And when I rapidly lost all of the things that had given me hope in my life, I gave up. I wasn't going to exert all that energy for recovery because I didn't even want to live anymore. Yeah. And then I went to prison, like rapidly after that.
Well, in a weird way, I think you and I had the same experience. It wasn't that prison was like a healthy or healing environment, but it was a place where we went and we healed.
Yes, absolutely. And my healing is despite my incarceration, not because of it. Because I had actively sought treatment in the community repeatedly and been turned away or denied, or the treatment I got was like a Bible in a 12-step meeting. And I'm like, yo, this isn't working for me. And they're like, pray harder. And I'm just like, what kind of medicine tells you to pray harder? But in prison, for the first time, like, I recognized my privilege. You know, I grew up working class white in a poor suburb of Portland, Oregon, in a house with a violent broken home. I never thought I was privileged. But then, you meet the people around you and you hear the lives that they have lived, and there was no denying that I was privileged. I could write a paragraph that made sense. And like, the sword or the pen became my sword. Like, I was like, oh, there's power in this. And I could help the women around me write medical request forms that would actually get them the medical care they needed to not die, or like help them with their court stuff. I could translate legalese into basic English. And eventually I could, in prison, once I learned fluent Spanish, I could translate Spanish into English and English into Spanish. Yeah. And then you just realize, like, oh, actually my childhood was fine. Like, people loved me. I was fed.
Yeah.
Like, someone taught me to cover my nose when I sneeze. Like, when I was really heavy into my meditation practice and I was surrounded out in Limerick County Jail with all these women, and I was so resentful. They were disgusting, filthy. They didn't shower. They stink, and they would just sneeze, like, Achoo! And you would just see snot like fly, like, and I'm like, who is heathens who don't even cover their nose when they sneeze? What is wrong with you? And then I thought, like, how old was I when I learned how to do that? How old was I? I don't remember being taught that, so I was clearly super young. And then to see so many people who don't even have basic manners, like cover your nose when you sneeze, I was like, oh shit. Something went wrong in their life before they were ever making decisions for themselves. To just not have like those like basic things that we consider common decency, but are actually taught. It's not common sense. Someone taught us that, and they were just essentially raised by wolves.
Man, those were the stories that broke my heart. There were a couple different guys I was in a cell with or got close to, and all but one of them had gone through the foster care system.
Yes.
And like the abuse, mental, physical, sexual, they experienced in a system that is designed to keep them safe from an unsafe home. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, yeah, I remember one guy, he was telling me his story, and I was in tears for like an hour. Like, I could not believe what he had gone through. And the fact that he could like calmly recite it, like in this very mechanical, like super traumatized method, is like, yeah, that's how it happens. And he can't even, like, it's so big he can't even feel it. Like, it's still like stuffed away in there. It's like, how is this dude ever gonna get clean? How is this dude ever gonna make a change in his life? Because his entire life has been trauma.
From, I mean, like, often starting at the age of 3 or 4 or 5 is like when the trauma history is. And then I realized then, like, I never fully understood how I became addicted to heroin because I didn't have that level of trauma, as a child. And addiction, though, is so often a trauma response. Yeah. And so, especially the women's jails are just full of incredibly traumatized people. And like, as Carrie said, it's just like tossing a bunch of traumatized people in a room together and then treating them fairly badly and like hoping that's going to be a solution. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And then we wonder why we have such a high recidivism rate, why there's such a high relapse rate. Well, we don't have effective drug treatment, and we're not treating people's trauma. And often we're like finding clever ways to re-traumatize them, sometimes accidentally, just a feature of bureaucracy, and sometimes on purpose, like the sadistic guards. And it just, it breaks my heart, because I'm not saying jails and prisons can ever be a place of healing, because they're not exactly a safe place, but they can definitely be a place where we stop doing harm. Yeah. Like that's something within our control. Like, as long as jails and prisons are going to continue to exist, and they are, how about we maybe stop committing further harm inside of them?
I think that's great. Let's take the medical code. Like, let's just not do harm.
Yeah, first, do no harm.
Well, and so, both of us have gotten out of our incarceration and become really passionate about change. And so I want to talk about some of the things you're doing. Like, I'm starting a nonprofit to provide reentry services. I'm consulting. I'm like that. It's become a passion of mine to try to provide the help and support that I received for other people, because I realize this person fundamentally does not have a chance until they get that chance.
Yes.
And so you've done a lot of harm reduction and other things that are just inspiring.
Yeah, for me, I see like drug policy and criminal justice as pretty similar because they were in my life. You know, I couldn't get access to high quality drug treatment. The only reason I'm alive today is because of harm reduction services. So, you know, naloxone, Narcan saved my life repeatedly. The only reason I don't have Hep C or HIV is because I lived in Portland, which had good access to syringe services. So it was like against the culture, even in the injection drug use circle, to share needles. Like, that was not okay. You do not do that. You do not do that, because you know where the exchange is, you know when it's open, and you can go get sterile syringes. So that cut down on our soft tissue infections. So, like, you know, yeah, I got a few abscesses, but people that don't have access to that, you know, they can lose their limbs. They
see people in Virginia. I mean, people share needles all the time. It's horrible.
We don't have, like, that is like so contrary to our culture, even, which like says a lot about like how effectively. And so, you know, I never got Hep C, and Hep C is incredibly common in injection drug use circles, and that is exclusively because I, you know, lived during my addiction years in Portland, Oregon, which had the services. Harm reduction, so like overdose prevention, like I was revived from overdoses, people knew what to do. Sometime later, when Narcan finally started being accessible, people would occasionally have naloxone on them. It's much better now. Like now, what I do, I started a nonprofit because, you know, I was in prison for my best friend's overdose death. I asked him to stay and get high with me that night, and he said he had to work in the morning, and he went home alone, and he overdosed and died alone in his bedroom. And that has haunted me ever since. But while I was in prison and the federal government spent $1.2 million incarcerating my co-defendants and I, the rest of my friends died. Like, so many of my friends died while I was in prison. And so the government's spending a lot of money to punish me for Justin's death, but while he was alive, he was just a criminal. Okay, like, he was just a drug addict criminal, and he just went to jail, prison. He was on parole. If he would have got pulled over that night, he would have got a PV and a felony possession charge. But because he made it home and overdosed and died, then all of a sudden the federal government unlocked all these resources that were not available to him while he lived to punish someone else for his death, against the wishes of his family, who said Justin died of a broken heart because his fiance had overdosed and died while he was in prison. And so I just saw that whole dynamic. I saw my friends dying. I saw famous rappers dying, and I've always like been really into rap music. And I thought, like, okay, well, rappers talk about drug use, and then they die of drug overdose. Like, why aren't we doing more with this dynamic? So I started a nonprofit, Beats Overdose, that provides overdose prevention services to the music industry. So we pass out naloxone and fentanyl test strips at concerts. And, you know, it's not like when I was using, where like heroin, you know you're taking a risk. You're injecting heroin in your veins, you know there's a risk. Now there's fentanyl and pills that look like Xanax, Percocet, fentanyl and cocaine, like cross-contamination. There's fentanyl contaminating the whole drug supply. And people don't know that. And people are dying who did not know there was a risk. And that seems so profoundly unjust, because if I were to ever die in my addiction, that's okay. Part of me chose that. Not that it's not quite the same as suicide, but you know that that's a risk and you accept it. But that people are not even able to know how at risk they are, and are just like doing a line at a party and dying. I lost a friend to a fentanyl-tainted cocaine overdose last year, and I'm not okay with that. And so now I focus on upstream prevention. I don't wait for harm to occur and then say, let's punish someone. No, 108,000 Americans died last year. Let's stop it. Let's work on it. And so that's what I do with the nonprofit, and it's super cool. I get to work with my favorite rapper, partner with Rhymesters Entertainment, the record label, go to concerts all over the country. I've reached about 250,000 people, have heard the message of fentanyl, Narcan, fentanyl test strips, keeping each other safe, and that feels really good.
when it's, somebody really close to me had somebody they were worried about and literally like went to the police, went to mental health, went to the community service board and was like, hey, what can I do for this person? And they were like, well, they need to get locked up, then they'll get the help they need, which is not how it works. You do not get the help you need when you're locked up. But literally that's our response to people in pain, people in trauma, people in addiction, is to punish them or punish somebody surrounding them rather than providing these like basic social services.
And it's just fascinating. It's like, my heroin addiction sucked. Like, it was miserable. I lost, the love of my life. I had problems, attending class, work. It's not like addiction was fun. And then the criminal justice system made it unfun. It already was miserable. The definition of addiction is continued use despite negative consequences. That's what makes it an addiction, because it's bad and you keep doing it. Like, it's hurting you, you keep doing it. That's when it crosses the line into addiction. And so this notion that, like, if we just make it hurt a little more, then you'll finally get it. And like, I was in the military. I was raised in a military family. I respect law enforcement. I respected the criminal justice system. So when I first got pulled into drug court, I leaned in to the system. And I'd had a relapse, and I hadn't been taking my Suboxone for a few days. And so I go to my drug court check-in, and I volunteer to go to jail. This is my first time ever in jail, because previously I'd only been released on my own recognizance. I volunteer to go to jail for 7 days because I want to be stabilized on my Suboxone. Like, I don't want to be able to use heroin again that night. Like, I want someone to take the willpower away from me. Don't let me use the heroin. Give me my medication, because that medication saves lives. It increases the survival rate by like 50%. And then I volunteer for jail. I have my medication, a letter from my doctor, and what do, Jesse? Can you guess?
They stick you in jail and don't give you access to medication.
That's right. They laugh in my face when I request the medication that I was arrested. That, like, specifically, in a booking, I was like, make sure my medication and the letter from my doctor and my prescription is all there for medical. And they were like, And then and that is scientifically, that is the most effective intervention for opioid use disorders and crime. It is the most effective intervention to reduce crime. Methadone and Suboxone are crime-fighting tools. But then I'm there in the county jail under the county sheriff, and they don't give it to me.
And so you're dope sick, and you're miserable, and you're angry, and you're hopeless, and you get out 7 days later and do what?
Immediately get high. Immediately. I never took, still to this day, I never took another Suboxone again. I gave up on life. I resigned myself to a life in death and heroin addiction. I felt so betrayed by this country because, like, I swore to defend this country with my life. I'm, like, stupidly patriotic. And I really, and this is, like, because I was white and middle class in one of the widest major cities in America, I really thought, like, the system was there to protect us somehow. Like, vaguely, I'm like, well, then why do we put people in jail? Like, why is our primary response to drug addiction incarceration if during that incarceration we're not even doing the bare minimum to make sure these people don't return to drug use? Like, we have a crime fighting tool in these medications, but the sheriffs are just like, make them hurt, make them suffer. And so I just, like, kicked cold turkey like millions of other Americans. And it wasn't until this year that the Department of Justice finally said, oh, actually, you can't do that. If people are on medications prescribed by their doctor, you have to continue them. But, like, that's too late for my friend Monty, who was on methadone for years and then went to jail for an ancient DUI warrant, and they pulled him off his methadone, and he relapsed, and he died. It's like, we've been killing people in the name of justice and making our cities less safe. Like, these are, like, we know for a fact it reduces recidivism. So why would law enforcement not support it? That's finally changing. We're seeing more support because the data is there.
Well, I think, in a weird way, you were lucky that drugs weren't as successful in the women's prison.
Yes.
Because you have men who go to prison behind drug addiction, do drugs their entire time in prison because they're so readily accessible, and then get out to continue to do drugs. There hasn't even been an intervention in the most basic level of behavior.
It's like, yeah, seriously, the U.S. government, we can't even keep drugs out of our prison. How do we think we're going to intercept every shipment of drugs that's coming through the mail or that's coming in cargo trucks over the border if we can't even keep drugs out of our prisons?
I agree. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for talking to me. I think you're doing a huge thing in the world, and hopefully we can keep doing it.
All right.